Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Extraordinary Technology Conference 2015. As we begin this next portion, which is the HHO technology section of our conference, we're going to be hearing from a gentleman by the name of Max Miller. Max Miller hails from Ohio, and he was just starting into the workforce when he saw on the news coverage of the Stan Meyer dune buggy running on water. He is an all-around jack of all trades, and he will be lecturing on unveiling the mysteries of Stan Meyer's work, and he has some amazing equipment to pursue. So without further ado, let's welcome Max Miller.
Thank you, Vernon. Okay, as some of you have probably followed a lot of my work, you can find, obviously that's me. If you want to email me, you can email me here. If you want to find my YouTube, you just go to YouTube and type in Iron D Max. And I also have a forum that explains most of this stuff in great detail. And before we get into that, the Project Icarus. I like to draw things, of course, and Icarus was actually, in Greek mythology, Icarus was a slave. And the only way for Icarus to escape being a slave was through the air. His father made Icarus a set of wings, and he flew to freedom. He was so happy to be free, he flew too close to the sun, melted his wings, and he fell into the water. But the point being, free at all cost. So, now into Stanley Meyer. Stanley Meyer, back in the 80s and 90s, he was on TV several times running a car on water. There's many witnesses, many videos that he went around the world speaking at conferences just like this one. Many people work on this. Mostly they fail. So what I wanted to do today was to cover how you can do it yourself. And the answer, we'll go through, there's 20 pages to go through, and just let me get through those, and then we'll back up, and you can start asking questions from there. So, there we go. So one of the memos that Stan put out was memo WFC 420. And most of these pages come directly from that memo. This says hydrogen fracturing process. Hydrogen is stored in water. We all drink water every day. Water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. So if you can break that bond of the water, you can have hydrogen as fuel. Obviously, oxygen is an accelerant for fuel. So water happens to be the perfect mixture of fuel and oxygen. And what Stan did was research how to break those bonds efficiently. And he always called it the hydrogen fracturing process, using voltage potential to stimulate the water molecule to produce atomic energy on demand. He wanted to run a car engine down the road with only water. So, if you look at this, most of you should be able to read that, I hope. I'll read it here where I can see it. The pulsing transformer. This is a transformer here. the two little lines signify a core of some kind. This is your primary, this is your secondary. These are what Stan added to a standard primary, a standard transformer. These are what he called resonant charging chokes. The resonant charging chokes happen to be the key to his process. By the way, you can download a PDF form of this directly from my forum. And on my YouTube, you can also see this, and it will give you the link to the forum to download this. So, he specifically tells you that there's an isolated ground between the resonant chokes and the transformer. Right here is his water cavity. The water cavity being something like this. There's two tubes basically. You have a negative and you have a positive, which 100 years ago someone figured out if you put a battery to water with two electrodes, it will make hydrogen and oxygen. So Stanley Meyer expanded on that greatly. Instead of the 100-year-old technology, he wanted to use a voltage potential, as in a high voltage static field, which he says here. Voltage amplitude or voltage potential is increased when the secondary coil is wrapped with more turns of wire. Any transformer, you have an input and the output is increased with more turns of wire. So, now on his circuit, there's a blocking diode. If any of you are into electronics, you recognize a diode is an arrow with a line. So the blocking diode acts as a valve, like a water valve. The water is here stored, and then it goes through the valve in one direction. That's what a diode does. So here he talks about how it functions. There's a resonant charging choke, and then the water cell. The water cell becomes a capacitor, and then the charging choke is a simple, when you add the two together, you get what's called an LC circuit. LC circuits are well known in the radio field. If you want to tune into a radio station, you need what they call a tank circuit to tune into that radio station. You simply turn your knob on the radio and you get a radio station. Well, when you turn that knob, it changes something inside the radio that adjusts this tank circuit between the two. You have the LC tank circuit, which what it does is the energy in this coil basically equals the energy in this capacitor, and then the energy kind of bounces back and forth. It's what's called an electrical resonance of a circuit. They call it a tank circuit, which you can look that up on, you could just do a Google search and you can find an LC circuit or a tank circuit pretty simply. And then this goes into some of the algebraic equations for the LC circuit that he uses here. And then this designates the coil, the resonant charging choke coil, and this is the water capacitor. So you have an electrical circuit that becomes a tank circuit, what they call the tank circuit, which resonates back and forth. So when you send a pulse frequency into this, it just kind of hangs out there and bounces back and forth. And when it does that, it charges this capacitor, which adds a voltage to both sides of the capacitor, which when that happens, you get hydrogen produced in the water. The water actually splits into hydrogen and oxygen. So the 100-year-old technology was you just used amperage. You put a battery on it and 1 to 2 volts. The battery just used the amperage of the battery, and then you could make all the hydrogen you wanted. But it took a lot of power. So what Stan did was he designed this circuit, and instead of using amperage, which is a lot of battery energy, he made a static field out of high voltage. And then the high voltage is what separates the water into the hydrogen and oxygen. Then this goes on to explain, here's your circuit again. This is your primary of your transformer, and then this is the secondary. Then it goes through your diode, which is a valve, and then here's these coils again. These are both labeled resonant charging chokes. And then here's your capacitor again, which is natural water. And then he goes on to explain natural water is a dielectric liquid. And then he goes down here to explain the dielectric properties of natural water being 78.54 ohms at 25 degrees. Water is 78.54 of resistance between the plates instead of, let me go back, If you have a capacitor, the capacitor is formed with 2 plates. In between the capacitor is a dielectric. The dielectric is a semiconductor. Every capacitor has a semiconductor between the plates. That's capacitance. So here the water becomes the semiconductor, so therefore the water forms the capacitor. And then if you read this, he clearly explains the exciter array. Therefore, he's using more than one. That's important, actually. So we now know that this is a tank circuit here, and this is also a tank circuit. Now, the tank circuit is very important because it's what's called electrical resonance. Once you set up a step charge effect, you have a pulse coming in, the electrical resonance bounces back and forth. And once you have the electrical resonance, then it can oscillate as long as all you have to do is feed a little energy in, and it just kind of oscillates back and forth. So this is important as well. The circuit in the form voltage intensifier circuit, which is this circuit here, everything together is the circuit. Now, in the form of resistance between the electrical ground and pulse frequency positive potential. So what he's telling us, see these little quotations around resistance? Resistance actually makes heat. Heat we don't want. So the dielectric between these two plates actually forms a resistance. But again, there's quotations around resistance. Reason being is it's a semiconductor. A semiconductor, you have to pass energy through something. If it's conductive, the energy goes straight through. If it's a semiconductor, it gets slowed down. If it's a resistor, it makes heat. If it's a semiconductor, as in resistance to voltage flow, there's no heat. So here, he explains that it's a modulator inductor. The reason he called it a modulator inductor, the inductors are here. Modulated because, just like your radio in your car, you have to tune it in. Well, what I can do is I can take a circuit board and then I can implant this pulse form into this circuit. Now, when I modulate it, I change the frequency of that pulse into this circuit. That's a modulation. So the modulated frequency actually goes into these resonant charging chokes, and as you turn the frequency, as you modulate it, you can clearly see that the voltage will climb and the amperage goes down. Now, if we can take the amperage down as far as possible and take the voltage as high as possible, then there's no heat as in amperage heat. There is a voltage static field on the plates. And then he goes on to explain the capacitance properties of the LC circuit is therefore tuned into resonance as at a certain frequency. Electrical resonance. So, let's say I want it 5 kilohertz. If I want to tune into 5 kilohertz, I turn my knob, correct? But I don't get the reaction. So, the capacitance or the inductance, this is inductance in this coil and this is capacitance in the water. So if I want to change this frequency, I can just change this one or I can change this one. I can just make a different value. And once I make a different value and then I turn the frequency in and out, I can modulate a different frequency into that circuit. And then he goes on to show that there's multiple steps. And what's important here, in his circuit, he had an on time and an off time. The pulses on created the energy into the transformer. The pulses off relaxed the energy in the transformer. And then here again we have the actual variables and the algebraic equations that he used to find exactly what capacitance he wanted. This is a symbol for capacitance, and this is a symbol for inductance. So you can take these formulas here, and you can figure out everything you want to know about the circuit: the capacitance, the inductance, the resistance, frequency. Thank you. So here again, he shows multiple pictures of the pulse forming network. and here again is the voltage intensifier circuit. The reason it's called the voltage intensifier circuit is he wants the voltage as high as possible. Now, you cannot have voltage without amperage. You cannot have amperage without voltage. If it's flowing.
You can't have voltage without current.
Not if it's flowing.
You can push on your car, if you don't move it, you didn't have current.
If it's just stationary, there's no amperage.
That's correct.
But once it flows, there's electron movement in the wire. Right. Ohm's law. So, what he says is if you get this thing to work correctly, this resonant charging circuit, you can exceed any value for voltage that you wound everything up for. Again, you have a primary, which is voltage in, it could be 12 volts, and you have a secondary, which is voltage out. Voltage out could be 10,000 volts out of an ignition coil for your car. You could have 10,000, you could have 60,000 volts from your ignition coil. Say again?
It said your ignition coil is wound, and you said, okay.
It's similar. It's similar.
You have to tie the primary and the secondary together.
Correct. It's similar. It's a pulse inductive pulse coil, ignition coil. And they tie the secondary ground to the primary ground. Yeah. But it's similar. You have to pulsate it to get it to function. If you take an ignition coil and just hook it to your battery, what happens? It'll burn up the coil. So it's similar to this, wired differently. So, thank you. So, again, the voltage intensifier circuit. We want as much voltage out as we can get. But the problem is, everyone sees this 20,000 volts. So they say, well, he made 20,000 volts across the water. This is speaking about something else, the injector plug. 20,000 volts into the injector, which we'll get to later, here in a second. So, realistically, if you read a different patent, he says it could be 100 volts. But when you put the voltage into these coils with this capacitor and you modulate it, at some point you can see on an oscilloscope, you see the voltage climb and the amperage goes down. I've done it, I've made videos of it, you can clearly see it, and what he said was, as long as the components would allow, the voltage could climb to infinity. So, as long as you design this circuit, as in coils of wire, to what you want, and then you pulsate it correctly, the voltage does go up towards infinity. But if you make a mistake, let's say you use the wrong insulating coating on the wire, if the voltage goes too high, it will short the wire out. And again here, the inductor, which is here, and again, resonant charging choke, and he gives the specific formula. What's Z stand for? Z. Z is in Zorro. Impedance. Thank you, guys. So, these are all Stan's equations directly out of this memo. The equations, I'm sure if you do the math, somebody does the math, they're going to line up. Myself, I like to just turn the knob. If I have an oscilloscope, the oscilloscope shows me everything that's going on. I can put different points of the oscilloscope on everything that I want to read. And as I turn the knob, I attenuate the frequency. I can see the voltage go up. And then I can tune whatever else to match. And then you can clearly see it. And there again, now he's talking about the lower coil, on how to tune the lower coil up here. And the reason he made it variable was because it needs to be out of phase with the other coil. Because when this tank circuit operates and this tank circuit operates, if they're in phase, it doesn't function. If they're out of phase, then the electricity can't pass. If the electricity passes, you get a ground state. You don't get any voltage rise. So as long as this coil is out of phase with this coil, it works. And then again, these are Stanley Meyer's formulas, not mine. And yeah, right here, Ohm's law. He even gives you the equations for, some of the equations for Ohm's law. Ohm's law is power in equals power out. Voltage times amperage equals wattage. You can't get away from it. You can't deny it. Those are the laws of physics. But if you use just voltage, it's a whole lot easier to maintain than amperage. Amperage costs a lot of money in gasoline. If you're running down the road, the alternator has to make amperage to charge the battery. That amperage is load, it is heat, it's horsepower from your engine. If you make voltage, it's less power from the engine. You agree with that? Yes. Because if I make 100 volts at 1 amp, if I make 10 volts at 100 amps, which one causes more horsepower draw? Right. Let's see. And then right here, he's talking about the potential energy. This is really important. So basically, these are the plates in the water. Even shows this one's a ground and this one's power in. This happens to be, wow, I have a hard time seeing that. Okay, he's showing here electron deflection, electron attraction, electron deflection. So if you have a high voltage field, positive and negative, let's say 10,000 volts. If you put electrons in between those plates, the positive side and the negative side, it will go one way because the electron is negatively charged. So it wants to go to the positive plate. And then here again, he's explaining the atomic interaction to voltage stimulation. He clearly tells us everything he wanted to tell us. This would be the nucleus of the water. Water is H2O, which is 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Water is rather interesting because it can self-ionize. If you have a glass of water, it's not really H2O. Some of it's H3, some of it's O2. Yeah, they've proven it. So, if you have a nucleus, and you have the electron that surrounds the nucleus, basically it's like the sun and the smaller planets that revolve around the sun. So in the hydrogen, you have a nucleus and you have an electron, there's only one electron. And as you excite that electron, it can jump over into an outer orbit. So what Stan wanted to do was separate the hydrogen from the oxygen. In order to do that, he created an electric field on the plates, and the electric field overcome the electron that held the oxygen and the hydrogen together. So, an electron is electron volts. Yes or no? I see you shaking your head. Electron volts, an electron is electron volts. There's a certain amount of energy.
An electron is the thing that the current is it's pushing the car. It's moving through the wire.
But it spins around the nucleus.
Yes.
And as it spins around the nucleus, in the case of hydrogen and oxygen, there's one electron that binds the two together. Two electrons. Either way.
That's why it wants two hydrogen, because
Yeah, that's what it is.
this ring of
There you go.
says you have to have two in there with it to make it right.
So, thank you. So, you have a,
Repeat that, please.
go ahead.
Okay, a molecule of water contains two atoms, one oxygen, two hydrogen, and to be in an electrical chemical balance, it has to have two hydrogen with one oxygen. The electron ring is shared
Right.
when it's a water molecule, but when you break those molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, the whole atom split, not just the electron.
Right. Now the static field on the plates is what separates the electron so that the hydrogen and oxygen,
What separates the atoms, not the electron.
yes, it pulls the electron to separate the atoms
It uses the electrical charge.
of the electron. Yeah. Thank you. So,
Resonance.
let's try it this way. So we have a hydrogen and an oxygen. We have a hydrogen and an oxygen, and they're bound with an electron.
They're sharing a valence.
Shared an electron binds them together. So, if we can take two plates and put a high voltage static field there, the energy of that electron can equal the energy of that static field. Once we overcome the energy of that binding, then they'll separate. So, that energy of the bound molecule, how we separate it is to make a high voltage static field. Once we make the high voltage static field, then it just falls apart. So in order to make the high voltage field, there's no amperage consumed. Very little.
Very little.
Very little, because you always have power in and power out. This is what we were discussing. So you have the oxygen and you have the hydrogen, and this is the electron. So the two hydrogens are bound to the oxygen with two electrons. So if we put a plate here and a plate here, and these two plates have a high voltage field, once we overcome the voltage potential, stored voltage that doesn't move at this instant, then the electron will just separate, and the electron will move, and the hydrogen and the oxygen will just fall apart. And that's what Stan did. And again here he shows the plates, he shows the oxygen, and he shows the hydrogen. The hydrogen is a positive potential, and the oxygen now becomes negatively charged. So the electrons are liberated, as he says it, pulled apart. The electron has to be pulled in one direction or another.
The atom and the electron stay together.
No. No. Bear with me. Bear with me. So, what he shows here is a liberated electron. It actually moves towards the positive plate because the electrons are negatively charged, correct? So if a negatively charged electron in a positively charged plate, it will move towards the positive plate, correct?
But in the real world, the hydrogen comes to the negative and the oxygen goes to the positive, sir.
He said that in the real world, the hydrogen comes to negative and the oxygen goes to the positive.
That's correct.
But keep the questions. We're gonna have that Q&A here soon.
So, is the electron negative, or yes or no?
The negative is electrons, but you're not talking about an electron, you're talking about an atom.
No, I disagree. We'll get to that later. I disagree. We'll discuss that later. This is what we're discussing. He's an electrical engineer, correct? Electrical technician. All electricity is theory. We're having a discussion because it's theory. Yes, parts are proven, but every time you look into electronics, it's theory because there's arguments that can be made. Yes. So, let's just bear with me, and the electron goes towards the positive plate. Bear with me. There's a reason for it. Yes, there is. So, if you have this outer plate that's round, and you have an inner plate, the roundness of the cavity is a resonant cavity because electrons as protons, oxygen, once it's separated, is an ion, correct? They all become classified as ions. Particles. The electron, in theory, is a particle. In theory, it can be considered a particle because it's there. It must have mass if it's there. So, particle physics, particles when they collide, they bounce, absorbed or bounce. So, if they bounce, there must be a velocity that they impacted, correct? So, if there is a velocity of impact of the electron, it will rebound at whatever direction it come from, depending on the surface that it impacted. So, once you get the impact and the rebound of the particle, there's what's called the Townsend effect. Townsend effect was electron avalanche. If an electron is moving and it collides with another electron, there's a collision. One goes one way, one goes another way, just like pool balls, if you're playing pool. Particles. If they impact, something happens. So, with the Townsend effect, it's an electron avalanche. One electron hits another electron, it multiplies. Once you get a multiplication of particles impacting each other, it's called an avalanche. So, once you get an avalanche, you can have a self-maintaining avalanche effect. Yes. It's proven in physics. More or less fact, theory. They have proven you can actually have an avalanche that turns into a self-maintaining avalanche. So, basically what I am saying is, if you have a high voltage field on these two electrodes, the electron will move one side or the other. The electron is a particle. Once the particle moves, it impacts into other particles, and then you can have a avalanche effect as in a cascade, and then once you have that cascading effect, you can have a self-maintaining discharge for as long as the water will allow. It will dissipate. It's a self-maintaining as in a time frame. There's mass and moving mass through the water. It will dissipate over time. Now, from the electrical, you said you weren't an engineer, you're a? I'm an electronic technician. Do you have any, would you like to add to that? I wish you would. Which one?
Folks, my name's Ed Unveiled. I'm out of Central Texas. I was a TV repairman for 46 years. I went all the way from tubes to plasma. I taught electronics at a junior college level, and I'm a high school dropout. There's not too many people that go there. Okay. This is an atom. This is an atom of hydrogen. This is supposed to represent an atom of oxygen, I guess. But chemically bonded, things are happy when they have a valence ring, the outer ring of a molecule, that goes to either 2 or 8, and there may be more numbers, but because we're dealing with water, we only have to deal with those 2. If you take the 2 electrons from hydrogen and add them to oxygen, it makes a very happy 8 electrons in the valence ring. It's really happy. It's hard to split. That's why it takes a lot of energy. Now, if you split those parts, the oxygen becomes a negative ion because it's missing electrons. The hydrogens become positive ions because they're looking for an electron.
Excuse me.
And yeah.
So where does the electron go?
The electron stays with its atom.
No.
It cannot separate from the atom, sir.
That's not true.
Okay. If it's a free electron, like in copper, it can flow. But in water, the positive...
Okay, let me ask you this. If you have a copper wire with flowing electrons...
If I have what?
A copper wire.
Yes.
You're pulling amperage.
Yes.
What is amperage?
Amperage is those electrons moving from negative to
Where
positive.
are they going?
Huh?
Where are they going?
From the negative terminal to the positive.
Because of why?
Because the positive is lacking electrons. That's why it's a positive ion. And the electrons, the negative has an excess of them, so it's trying to get over there to balance out.
So if I have a diode in the wire, what direction does the electron flow?
Against the arrow of the diode.
Against
It's a
the
check valve. It only allows current to flow in one direction, and it's against the arrow.
So where does voltage come from?
Voltage is a pressure. You can have voltage without any current. You cannot have current. Huh?
No, you can't.
Yes, you can.
Where is it?
If you got a battery sitting here at 12 volts, and you put a voltmeter across it, it's 12 volts, right?
Okay.
How much current's flowing?
Well, you're not flowing current because you're just measuring it.
So I can have voltage.
Hey guys, this sounds like a discussion for the hallway.
No, I'm not. No, this is good.
Okay. All right, you asked for it. Go for it.
No, this is good. I like it.
Okay. What is your question?
What is positive voltage?
Positive voltage is a lack of electrons.
How does that make any sense?
Because that's the way electronics works. That's the way electronics works.
No, electrons are negative and positives are positive ions. Hydrogen plus is a positive ion.
Okay, I'll tell you what. If you want, we'll get a battery, a glass of water, a set of jumper cables, and I can prove to you that the hydrogen comes off negative, the oxygen comes off positive.
Slow down, slow down.
Okay.
Okay, now, this is good, I like this. So, if you have your brain, bear with me. If you have your brain, the mitochondria in your brain, it takes water and forms energy as in a hydrogen plus. The oxygen goes into your body. The electron is removed with an electron chain, and the electron turns into iron rust. The positive potential is held in your brain cell. When you think, it fires that hydrogen plus. Positive energy. This is real.
Well, I'm not an expert on the brain, but I do understand electronics.
No, now let's wait, Ed. Now let's wait.
Okay.
In your brain, it's stored energy as hydrogen plus.
Okay.
The electron is transformed into rust. This is real physics.
I can't answer, I don't know. But if there's a chemical expert out here, explain to him.
Would you do me a favor? I have a question. Max Miller, would you do me a favor? Could you finish the conference of yours so that I can...
I will. Hey, Ed.
To your question.
Ed, thank you very much. I would love to have more conversation with you after the conference. Thank Ed, because I thoroughly enjoyed that. So, back to the brain cell. This is what David and I discuss at times, because the brain cell has inside of it mitochondria. Mitochondria is actually bacteria. The bacteria takes water and transforms that water into hydrogen, oxygen, and an electron. The electron is passed in what's called an electron chain, and it does form into rust. That's a little bit further than we want to go. But the hydrogen plus is held in the brain cell as in all of your body cells. Potential energy as a positive ion, not a negative electron. Positive ion. Every time every muscle in your body moves, every brain thought is positive energy from that positive ion. Had nothing to do with the electron. The electron is gone. So, we have positive potential energy that is not an electron. Proven real physics. Thank you very much, Ed. I love you. So, before we get into any more questions, how much time we got?
Right now, we've got about 10 more minutes for lecture.
10 more minutes. McCain, please step up to the microphone, please. I'll tell you what, come up here, McCain. So, everything you see here has been my work on figuring out electrical physics, positive energy, because negative energy is the only energy. I don't agree. There is positive energy. If you take a battery and you connect it, there's positive ions and there's negative ions. You have positive energy, you have negative energy. We'll discuss more later. Thank you, Ed. Love you. So, Mr. McCain.
Yes.
Mr. McCain has been wanting to get into the Meyer process. He made a Meyer injector. This is water. You want to say it?
Water fuel cell.
Say it close to me so they can hear it. Water fuel cell. In miniature. Positive potential, negative potential. The water, air, exhaust flows through it. And in the end, after Stan worked on all of this stuff that you can see over here in the room, we'll be in the room until Sunday. You can actually pick it up. I'll answer your questions. I'll be more than happy to have very good conversation with any of you here. You didn't scare me, Ed. So, McCain needs a round of applause because everything you see here is very expensive. I have spent the last 10 years educating myself on physics that are not taught in school about electrical energy, positives and negatives. And McCain has decided to spend his money and donate it to the cause. Thank you, McCain. So, thank you.
It's my pleasure. We spent a lot of money on that.
So, everything you see is part of Stan Meyer's stuff. I've been replicating it. I've been trying to figure it out. I've been trying to figure it out, and everyone else in the world, I think, is trying to figure it out. And realistically, Mr. Ed here, that's what we need. We need conversation back and forth. We need everyone to get together to work on this, because Electron Avalanche is free energy. Self-maintained discharge, Electron Avalanche. You not only have particles as negative, you have particles that are positive. So, questions, please. Short questions, Mr. David A. Puchta. Did I say that right?
Okay, the first question is, tell me if I'm right. That's an EPG gas processor that you built. Hold on. I got a bunch. That's EPG gas processor that you built. Replicated Stan Meyer's. That's a resonant cavity that you built, replicating Stan Meyer's. The black and white things are gas processors for the Stan Meyer's dune buggy. This is a Stan Meyer's cell, and these are circuit boards that you replicated of Stan Meyer's. This is a power supply of Stan Meyer's that you replicated. Those are resonant charging choke coils that Stan Meyer did, you replicated. Those are circuit boards of Stan Meyer's that you replicated. This is a circuit board for the EPG that you replicated. And I think my question is an answer. I think you're the only person that has ever replicated all of this stuff at Stan Meyer's. Am I correct?
As far as I know.
All right, that's what I thought.
In the last 10 years, I've spent $250,000.
Correct.
And that's not counting hours, that's money.
So the next question that I have, if I'm correct, is that when Stan Meyer had the charging circuit, it's pulsing the circuit, which is what the
Positive pulse.
which the HHO guys are doing, but there's a missing element that we need to bring to the table, because he needs to finish this. When you pulse the molecule of oxygen and hydrogen, am I correct that the hydrogen will attenuate and create an electron to help separate them during the high voltage discharge?
There's a lot of things that go on with electrons. One theory is they just pop in and out of existence. I don't buy that theory myself.
Till I can see it.
I don't buy it. We are completely surrounded at all times with negative and positive energy.
Okay, so my last question is, you've replicated all of this stuff, including these boards. Can I go on your website and buy this board? Are you actively commercializing this?
My friend, Per Ritter from Denmark, you can go there and buy all of these boards. I simply don't have time to put them out there on my website.
So now you've replicated Stan Meyer stuff, you are actively commercializing it, and for everybody who wants to study, test, or do this on your own, you can buy these boards for incredibly, incredibly cheap.
This is the exact board, 100% replicated, that was in the buggy. This is a 100% replication of the resonant cavity that was in the buggy. Resonant cavity in this case is very important. Particle impacts, rebounded particles. Is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you, David Puckta. Now, before this gentleman, go ahead, come on up. Before this gentleman gets carried away, there's a young lady here in the audience, Pam Golden. She has a company called Lightworks. The reason I'm mentioning Pam is because I actually invented something. I thought I did. Pam out here at the table has a very similar healing, can we say healing? Healing device. Let's say healing device that works off of photon energy that energizes electrons, which is the exact same principle that Stan used in the gas processor. So, Pam, without knowing it, she proved part of Stan Meyer's work with her healing device that she has right out here. Thank you, Pam. Everyone should go see Pam. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah, two questions. The first question is, what type of voltages and frequencies are you talking about here when you finally get the effect?
Most of Stan's work, he specifically says around 5 kilohertz.
Around 5 kilohertz, what about the voltage?
Voltage, it depends on your circuitry. The voltage will depend on the dielectric strength of your wire that's
Okay.
part of the coil, because if you exceed that voltage, voltage surrounds wire.
Oh, I know.
Electrons pass through the wire. Voltage is around the wire. Spins. 10 minutes.
Anyway, so we're talking about 5,000 hertz, and voltages, it can be anything, is what you're saying.
Voltage is dependent on
No, I don't know
your
how voltage
circuit.
works. Just I want
It's
to know how the
dependent on
device
your
works.
circuit.
I understand the physics of it.
Yeah, he specifically says in one patent it could be as low as 100 volts.
Okay, that's curious because see, I looked at his patents. I kind of remember that coil.
There's over 50 patents.
Is it? Well, I don't remember that. I think I might have seen that coil that was 180 out at the bottom, and I assume it's 180. And I'm really curious about that little portion of the discussion because at that point, if you're dumping huge amounts of charge, but only a few of them are actually adhering to the associated molecules, and then you blow them back when you're in opposition. I'm wondering, does the water get hot?
Stop for a second.
Does the water get
It's
hot?
not opposition because it's a static positive and negative.
We won't worry about that, but
Yeah.
does the water get hot? Or does it stay cool?
If you do it correctly, the more correctly you do it, the colder the water is.
Okay, that tells me what
That's an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, that...
6 years ago, I went in front of some investors. They wanted to see what I had. That's not in my videos. I made 10 liters a minute from a 3-horsepower engine. It generated power, and it made 10 liters a minute. And the water was cold when you put your hand in it, too.
Right.
The entire time. It ran for roughly 20 minutes, and it was cold the entire time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Actually, sorry about that. I'm going to butt in here. You got a lot of cool, cutesy toys out here. Got any more show and tell?
If you want, later on, not today, I'm tired, we can fire this big boy up if you guys want. I have everything here to do it. It's the alternator unit. I have the alternator and the tube set and the power to the alternator, to charge the alternator. Sunday, Saturday, set it up, we'll do it. I need a good electrical connection for the 2-horsepower motor. It's 2 horsepower because that's what I pulled off the trash dump.
I'm Byington Sims from Bisbee, Arizona. My question is do you use distilled water in your electrolyzer?
Say again?
Do you use distilled water?
Stan Meyer clearly shows a garden hose into his car.
Oh,
Stan Meyer lived in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He lived in the city. He used city water,
city water. Okay.
which is a key point that I didn't get to. Is this the last question? You come on up. So, he used city water. There has to be a resistance, there has to be conductivity for the circuit to work.
Oh, okay, all right.
If there's no, he says you can use anything, but you have to change the circuitry.
Oh,
The circuitry that we all know is there was designed to use with city water. So if you don't use city water, it's not going to work.
oh, I see. So,
You have to have a load.
yeah.
Before I forget, the load is like an antenna. It's a transmitter. It is a radio frequency transmitter, just like transmitting your local radio station. If you look into radio transmitters, you're going to find that circuit right here. You have a load and you have impedance matching coils so that you can transmit a frequency on one wire. One antenna is your load.
So the water electrolyzer is essentially a semiconductor, so it's like a leaky capacitor.
Yes, exactly. Yes. We can talk about that more later.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about it a little more later.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be over here in the room all day tomorrow and Sunday. I would love to discuss more electronic theory.
I'm Elios, Mark Holken from Albuquerque. And so I understand that the electrolyzer can produce gas that goes into the EPG, but the water spark plug, it's completely standalone, or do you have to have the gas processor with it?
Yes, you're exactly right. The gas processor is very important because Stan did not make 60 liters a minute. He made the bare minimum amount that he needed. And what he did was change the hydrogen into a synthetic gasoline. So there was no modifications to the engine. The gas processor is very important. What it did was take ambient air and change it into a non-combustible. Oxygen is an accelerant for gasoline. This made ozone and some other things. So there was non-combustibles because the hydrogen was the perfect mixture to burn. So once you add non-combustibles, it's like adding the carbon to make gasoline. All fuel is a hydrocarbon.
Yes. So the gas processor goes with the water spark plug, but you don't necessarily have an electrolyzer anymore.
The spark plug is the electrolyzer.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's a minute amount. He even gives, in some of the paperwork, he gives the exact size of the droplets and the amount of water to run 60 miles down the road.
So it eliminates a lot of the electronics that you would otherwise be.
Well, not really.
Yeah.
It's still some pretty extreme electronics to run this coil.
You still have to have an LC circuit that interfaces with it? Or?
No.
No.
This coil runs the injector,
Oh,
which we've also
right.
are working on duplication.
So in other words, you couldn't you couldn't use the water spark plug completely efficiently until you perfected that?
Maybe I already have.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay.
One of my videos you can see on YouTube, it's called Cold Fire. Check it out.
All right.
I take an index card and I use voltage potential and it blows through the card. The voltage is 60,000 volts, blows through an index card, and there is 0 burn marks. It's just no capacitor in the circuit.
Wow.
Yeah, like I said, I've been working on this a long time. This is just the beginning that I want to give to the world. This is
Indeed.
This is $250,000 worth of information in my head, and you all have the chance to pick my brain this weekend. And you can pick this stuff up as long as you don't drop it.
Okay, no, do that.
Mike.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm from LA. That's not Louisiana. So the gas processor is actually taking air and it's used as an inert process to cool the combustion chamber.
No,
No.
no, you've all seen ozone generators. Yes? Basic concept of ozone generator. This takes, ambient air is full of oxygen, 20% roughly, nitrogen, and some other trace gases. This thing actually transforms those gases into something else that doesn't burn. Your carbon for your fuel.
Okay, now that's
It's
fed
not-
back into the combustion chamber?
Say again?
That's fed back into the combustion chamber?
Yeah, you have to feed that with the hydrogen because he never made 60 liters a minute.
Yeah.
The buggy that everyone saw in the driveway, my best guess was 7 liters a minute. The biggest mistake most people make is they put too much hydrogen in their engine when they try to run it and they just flood it out. Yeah, if you look at the hydrogen content of gasoline, it's not that much. And again, Stan gives you a whole list of all that stuff. Stan had over 50 patents, everything you could want to know about running on hydrogen, he did it.
Thanks,
And
Max.
the EPG is actually a particle accelerator. Iron ions and argon remove the electron and then they bind together. The iron is now bound to the argon. And then as it spins, it induces voltage with Lenz's law. It induces voltage so you get more power out than you put in. The one stack, Stan shows an EPG, a multi-stack. He said it was 110 volts and 30 amps output with a small wattage of input. 30 amps at 120 volts, that's, what's that? That's a lot.
Time's up.
So in closing, if you guys weren't involved in free energy, which is why most of you are here, you have to set up an electron avalanche or a positive particle avalanche. There's not only electrons, there's anti-electrons, there's positrons, there's anti-positrons. Electrical physics is very, very complex, and there's many, many arguments with it. But if you are interested in Stan Meyer's work, all you have to do is go to my forum and my YouTube. On the forum, you can actually participate. You can put down your thoughts. You can open your own thread and put down whatever you want. But mainly, it all has to do with Stanley's stuff. And you will find directions on how to build most of this, what I've already built. And this man right here, you can see what he built just from being on the forum. Thank you very much, Mike. So, thank you, and I enjoyed the conversation.